Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be joining you all this week. We are going to just jump right in because we've got a lot to cover this week. We're going to start off a little bit different in that we're going to talk about some of the concepts in the Ivy text, but it's going to be different as the things that we're talking about are not necessarily in the Ivy text, but it relates to communication, attending, the nonverbals, all of those sorts of things. So this is something that I learned a few years ago at a seminar, and I'm just kind of recreating it to fit who I am and for the purposes of this class. So we are going to do a brief study on the brain, but don't worry, it's not going to be too technical in nature, especially given the fact that I am not an artist and the brain that I drew hardly represents what an actual brain looks like. But we're going to just pretend, for sake of this lecture, that this is the human brain. Okay, it's split up into three different parts, and I apologize the way that the camera is facing. This actually looks backwards, but I will explain to you what each one of these means. So we are created with three parts to our brain, and this is true despite the poor drawing. The bottom half, or the bottom third right here, is called the reptilian brain. This is the part of our brain that is present from birth, and its purpose is to continually scan for danger and for threats. It has an automatic function and it never sleeps. So 24/7, this part of the brain is always scanning for what could be a threat or a potential danger. Now, of course, we'll talk about what danger and threats are later on in the lecture. The second part of the brain right here is what we call the mammalian brain. And this is the part of the brain that's typically developed by about age 6 or 7. This is the part of the brain that sends alerts to the reptilian part of the brain regarding what to do when potential danger or alerts or threats come its way. This is the portion of the brain that helps us to calm down. This is what we tap into every single time that we develop any sort of coping skills. We tap into the mammalian part of the brain. And what's interesting to note is that this part of the brain is very rationalizing, like it rationalizes our actions, but it is not a rational part of the brain. So essentially what that means is when there's a threat that's perceived and it sends the message down to the reptilian part of the brain, this part of our brain right here doesn't necessarily have the skills or the tools to make a rational choice, but it instead rationalizes what the action is that the reptilian portion of the brain suggests that we act out of. And the final part of the brain up here is called the neocortex, or sometimes it's called the Einsteinian brain. And this is the part of the brain that begins to develop later in childhood, or really kind of into those adolescent years, and continues on into adulthood. And the purpose of this part of the brain up here really is to modify and to moderate impulsive behaviors. This portion of the brain right here believes that it makes 90% of the daily decisions, but that is actually wrong, okay? So it believes that it makes 90% of the decisions, but that's not true. What is really true is that the reptilian and the mammalian parts of our brain are the ones that make the actual responses of what we do and how we react to people and circumstances in any sort of perceived threat. I'm going to set that down right there. The reptilian and the mammalian brain allow our responses to get big in order to scare threats away, or really small in order to avoid the potential threat. Essentially, these two parts of our brain are our default. This drives our behavior, our thoughts, our actions, our response to people in every situation, without taking into consideration this neocortex part of our brain, which helps us function as an adult and as an adolescent also. So, what is a threat that the reptilian and mammalian portions of the brain would potentially perceive? And really, the answer, the greatest threat that the reptilian brain is scanning for is to find the answer to the question of, do I belong? What research has shown is that they have found that without people we cannot survive, that we're created for relationship. So everything that we do and say on a day-to-day basis in any situation is to get one of 6 needs met, and that is belonging, autonomy, safety or security, self-expression, purpose or significance, and connection. These are the 6 basic needs that we have as human beings that we need to have met when we are wanting to live and to thrive fully. So really, conflict comes between people when we're not getting a need met, or when the needs that we're looking to be met are different than the other person is trying to get met. So a great way to explain this is to imagine yourself as a parent of a teenager, and many of you are or you have had teenagers. Okay, so for instance, if I as a parent am trying to get my need for connection met, and my teenager is trying to get their need for autonomy met, it could create significant conflict, even an argument. Unfortunately, when we're not getting our needs met, we scheme as to how we can get them met. That's where that reptilian and mammalian part of the brain come into play. They're scheming to make sure that that threat, that perceived threat of need for autonomy and belonging, is actually met. But, and this could really look any way. It could be picking a fight, accusing, nitpicking, blaming, playing the victim, making a big deal out of something that really doesn't need to be blown up, or blowing things out of proportion. So it's interesting, or an interesting piece to this, is that in arguments and conflict, we use questioning as a tactic to build our case, accuse, and or prove a point. But questioning actually raises people's anxiety by 40%. Okay? So remember, we've got the bottom 2/3 of the brain that are always scanning for threats 24/7. And a threat really could be as simple as searching for an answer, or the right answer to a question. So in the mind of your teen, or maybe even in the mind of your client, questions can become a trap. All questions, and this is how I have really tried to revamp a lot of my own practice, all questions can be turned into a statement. And really that statement reduces anxiety and allows your teen or your client to feel safe, even in the midst of an argument or a disagreement or a heated discussion. So how was your day? What did you learn? Could feel very direct. And asked, hoping to get a specific answer or piece of information rather than seeking the heart of your client or teen. If you shifted that language just a little bit into, tell me how your day was, tell me what you learned, these statements allow some of our deepest needs to be met. For the bottom 2/3 of our brain, so again, the reptilian and the mammalian portions of our brain, listening is one of the primary things that we can do to reassure that sense of belonging. The true communication skill to learn is finding words to say that the receiving person will hear. Words are a way that we can hide. When we truly listen, our greatest need of belonging is being met, and the walls of defense are taken down. The way that somebody learns how to listen is to be listened to. So this is really effective when we work with our clients and creating that space of belonging by listening, by inviting them into the process. So I just wanted to give you that little kind of fun lesson on the brain. You can go ahead and use it or not. But it's very fun to also kind of try it out on people and see what turning your questions into statements do, and see if that might not soften up people. So before we jump into the case study for this week, which I'm so excited about, I want to just talk really, really briefly about empathy, because that was one skill that was talked about in the Ivy text. And as most of y'all know, empathy is essentially standing in someone else's shoes. This concept is really going to be one of the most beneficial to you as a therapist. So often, the mere compassion and empathy that we can offer to our clients speaks far more than any words of encouragement or advice or challenging. You know, we live in a world where Everyone rushes about their daily business. Everyone has to have a story to top somebody else's as far as how busy their life is, or how hard their life is, or how bad things are going for them. So the sheer concept that there is somebody, you as a therapist, who is going to listen to, agree with a client, fight for them, this is sometimes one of the things that keeps somebody in therapy. This relationship is so unique and really is unmirrored in a lot of other relationships. And it's important to note that we simply cannot understand everything that a client is going through. But what we can do is remember what those emotions feel like and use them to take an empathetical position. So for instance, you yourself might not have been abused by somebody physically, but you do know, perhaps, what it's like to feel scared or trapped, anxious, terrified, unsafe, stuck. You can use those experiences of yourself to be present in the room and take an empathetic stance. Nonverbal cues are also very important here, and they connect back to that communication in the brain that we talked about earlier, too. Nonverbal cues demonstrate that you are a safe person and that the client is able to trust you, that you are there with them bearing witness to their story. So as you nod along, as you lean in, as you have an open posture rather than a closed posture, what that does is send signals to the client that you are safe and that they can trust you.